Hello and welcome to this game review. So this was a 10 plus 0 game, and as I told you in your training plan, 10 plus 0 is basically blitz chess. And the blitz chess will not really help us improve, as with such a low time we can't really think about our moves. We only have time for basic blunder checks and to check whether we're blundering a piece or something. Other than that, there's simply no time to think about our moves. And if we cannot think about our moves, it's quite unlikely that we will play good chess. So I would suggest playing at least with 15 plus 10, but I would suggest even longer time controls until you're quite at a high level where you have a bit of a stronger intuition, where you're able to play with such low time. Okay, in this one, we have to focus on checks, captures, and attacks, mostly captures in this one. And the end game was also quite interesting. And you mentioned you lose a lot in the end game. Well, also, this is again hard to analyze because this is a 10 plus 0 game, but in this end game, you already had a lost position going into the end game, but you fought back quite a bit. And there was a chance to draw, but it's quite difficult. But we will look at it. So here, e4, e5, and knight f6, this is a possible move. Generally, we should try to defend this pawn on e5, not counterattack, because when we're playing with black, we are one tempo behind. So for example, now if we take here, after queen e2, we cannot move the knight because of a discovered check with knight c6. And we are going to lose our queen in one way or another. So this is one bad scenario. So generally I would avoid playing moves like knight f6 and just stick to knight c6, defending the pawn, and then develop the pieces. Okay, now white plays knight c4, bishop c4, but this simply allows black to take this pawn, and it's not clear why we're not taking, and already checks, captures, and attacks, specifically captures, we must look at them at all times, and here this was quite possible. If white takes here, now after d5 we're taking the center, attacking the bishop. We can continue with bishop d6 and castling kingside, and we have a very healthy position. Set bishop c5, but now we are also not looking at the opponent's captures. And here white could take here. And again, since we're playing black, we can't play symmetrically. We cannot take here, because now white can take here with check, and we cannot take here, right? Because it's a check. So we are losing here, as we have lost our pawn. So knight c3 instead, and the castles, again giving up this pawn, but white doesn't take it for some reason. Knight c6, bishop e3, d6. So now black develops his pieces. We take, and queen e7, a3, some moves by both sides. And here we get another choice. And here black has a lot of squares for the queen, so it might be difficult to choose what's the best one. But it's quite easy to see which squares are bad, right? As here, the opponent is attacking not only the queen, but also this pawn. So after queen e6, knight c7, we are now lost. It's over, basically. One move is enough to get a losing position, which is why we must do this blunder check method on every single move that we ever play. And here we should have checked the checks, captures, and attacks for the opponent after we have made the move. So we must visualize that we have made the move and then think, what can he capture? Well, he can give some checks, but they are covered. Otherwise, he can capture the bishop, but that's covered. But who's covering this one? No one, after queen e6. So at the moment, if it was white to move, he wouldn't take it because it's defended. But after queen e6, he will. So this is why we must do blunder checks in every single move. And as I mentioned, this is basically impossible to do in 10 plus 0 games, which is why we shouldn't even play 10 plus 0 games, because these aren't really chess games. These are kind of more like first-person shooters where we have to kind of guess what the best move might be, and we don't really have any time to actually think about the chess part. So now we are lost. So instead, queen d8 should have been played, and then we can try to exchange the knights. Queen d7 is kind of possible, but interestingly enough, here white wins with a very pretty tactic, knight f6. This is a fork on the queen and the king. Of course, if we take, this is the interesting part, bishop h6. And white's not threatening the rook. He's actually threatening queen g3 check. After king h8, queen g7 would be made. And there is actually no way to deal with this threat. If we move the king, then now he can take here with check. And queen g7 is checkmate on the next move. So these are quite difficult things, relatively, but we must sit there and figure them out. We cannot kind of guess where the queen belongs, right? And here, of course, the queen cannot go because of knight c7. And now we are down an exchange in the pawn. So now white should win quite easily. He does give you some chances, of course. He wins some pawns, queen d5, and now we get an endgame. And here white should win quite easily by one idea is to bring the king and then just take over the c-file. Otherwise, he can try to take over the c-file in other ways as well. Though here, rook c1 doesn't check the opponent's, well, your checks, and the opponent plays this move instantly. And now after knight e2, we're getting back some material. And now we are down 2 pawns. Back rank mate is threatened. If it wasn't, then we would be fine. But unfortunately here, we are down 2 pawns in a rook endgame, which is usually lost. If we're down 1 pawn, then often we can compensate by playing actively. But here we are down 2 pawns, so this is hard to play. Rook c3, e5. So white pushes his pawns a little bit. And here, one of the principles of the opening can be used. If we can, we must play as actively as possible. So for example, here we have a choice of rook b7 or rook d4, right? And don't forget on every move to think about your choices, right? And rook d4 is definitely more active because it also attacks this pawn and keeps an attack on this pawn. So now if white, for example, defends like this, we can start attacking like g5, threatening this pawn. And if he takes, for example, then here, surprisingly enough, the position is actually equal even though white is up 2 pawns, because his rook is actually stuck. And our rook is very active. Our king can come in slowly, for example, after f5, king f7, king e6, and we are actually doing quite well. But for this to happen, we need to play actively. Rook b7, now our rook is tied to the defense of the pawn, so white can do whatever they want. He pushes the pawns, and now you brought the king, which is a good idea generally in the endgame. But still we are down 2 pawns, so there's not that much to do. Up until here after b3, now we're getting a pawn back. And we have a pretty active rook, and our king is defending the passed pawn. So at this point, the position is actually not that bad anymore. White's idea is to defend the pawn with the king and try to check with the rook from the side to eliminate the blockade of the passed pawn and to go further. So this is something we had to understand. So here h5, okay, and here you took the pawn, which is very natural, but this is a losing blunder. And it turns out we had to give some checks to this king because it is tied to this pawn. At the moment, white's threat is to give this check, after which he will be able to push the pawn, and then the king can also help. So this is something we must not allow. So rook e2. And now wherever the king goes, well, if it goes here, we can just go and pick up this pawn. Well, not instantly, because of the check and rook b5 exchanging rooks, but we can continue giving checks. And as soon as the white king is away from his pawn, we can now move the king rook away. And again, someone has to defend this pawn. So this is kind of a drawish position. Black's rook is simply very active, and it's hard for white to defend all of his pawns. But after this check is very strong. And now white takes this f6 pawn as well, so now he has 2 passed pawns. So, and the king is also involved. So from here, the win was quite simple for white, and he ended up winning quite smoothly. So in this game, well, firstly, the endgame wasn't really the focus, right? As the most important part of this game was blundering a fork here. And we must do everything we can to not blunder forks like this, starting with thinking about the opponent's checks, captures, and attacks on every move before making our move. We must see if any checks, captures, and attacks are threatening. For example, after queen d8, this check is covered, this check is covered, this capture is covered, the bishop is covered. So no, we're not blundering anything. So maybe, of course, we want to put the queen on an active square, not go back, but sometimes we simply cannot. And we must ask ourselves if we can or if we cannot before making the move.